Good morning, Dr. Brad.
Kurt Doolittle, what a wonderful experience it is to share coffee with you on a Saturday morning,
It's a
sir.
really beneficial arrangement, I think.
Especially in this episode 2077.
Yes.
We have all these people. Look at them. They're clicking buttons. They're hitting like and subscribe and notification buttons so they get notified. And then they're leaving glorious commentary.
Yeah. We're very consistent in how many views we get and even who we get them through. But and there was this, well, we should have more viewers. I'm like, I'm not sure.
That's okay.
Because we say it's one of our relative anonymity gives us a freedom of speech that others can't sort of engage in, and the obscurity of how we're speaking about it is someone else. But anyway, so how are you, Dr. Brett?
I'm good.
Now, apparently you were going to be prepared for this morning, if I remember correctly, with a bunch of interesting topics. Although you were talking a moment about how hard it is to make women understand what we're doing here without wanting to kill us. You didn't say it like that. I did, but
that's for the record, right? Appreciate that cover. The issue is this: the conversation went roughly in the direction. This is for the audience, of course. The conversation went roughly in the direction of, it must be irritating to jump in halfway through this conversation and hear this characterization of cognitive styles in feminine and masculine, and some women really don't tolerate it very well, and they bridle at the thought of it because it rubs their hair the wrong way. Because
primary female fear is being left behind. Anytime you create a division that isn't a flat line, right? I mean, anytime you form a distribution or any kind of form of division, their instincts go off the chart because it's one of their, it's not their primary, it's one of the primary instincts they have is the fear of left. I mean, it's where neuroticism comes from.
Oh, okay. So it's their neurotic impulse is to chatter about it.
Right, to prevent any suggestion of difference, right? About difference in value, because they don't want to be left behind.
I know, it's interesting. So I was having this conversation with my dear wife, and she says, it's not like one is better than the other. And I said, nobody said it was.
No.
It's different. It's just different.
It's just different. And the value is in the difference, not the
value is the compatibility of the differences in a cooperative sense.
Correct.
Okay, that was for the record.
Why was it fucking hard to understand?
AI is because it's a preference. I prefer not to understand that.
Is that if you're not indoctrinated, if you're a woman and you're proud of being female and you like being female, I hate the word submissive. I think what it means is seductive. I think you should be the word should be seductive instead of submit, because I hate that word. But those women, they're like perfectly fine with it. No, we're women, you're men. I don't want to be a man. But there's a group of women who are feminine. Feminism has told us that they want to be men.
Still, it makes no sense because being a man sort of sucks.
Well, they don't know that.
I know. And there was one that figured it out. She was trying to act the part of a man for 2 years is what her plan was. She made it for 1.5 years and then she quit and eventually committed suicide. She learned what she learned was so awful. Which that's a terrible story. What's that?
Well, she had issues in the first place, but yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard to be a guy. It's hard to be a woman. It's hard for each sex in different ways.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's hard for a guy to feel valuable. But we don't have the neuroticism they do, right? We don't have this need for attention they do. Because we can systematize, we don't need the overconfidence they do, right? So it's not a problem for us to understand, well, this is my sort of spot. But if you can't do that, I mean, you always think you're being oppressed or held back. You know, no, you can't make women, for some reason, women can't even understand that idea. They can say, this is my truth, but they can't say, this is my place.
Mm.
You understand that there's a very, it's, you came up with something we needed to break into sexes yesterday. I forgot what it was. But I mean, the number of differences in cognition that show differences, the consistency of the difference in cognition between the sexes, and there's freaking infinite. We could spend for, I mean, the chart I've got on here is like, I don't know, it's 4 pages long or something.
Yes.
Right. I mean, it's huge. So, I mean, and it's not even complete. But I mean, that example I just gave is another one, is another example of how.
We were going to make a series. We were going to generate a series related to empathization and systematization.
Right. But it's just short and long, right? I mean,
It's time preferences, right?
Time preference. And one of the things that's bothered me is that I suppose I could write a paper on it. I don't have time to write a paper on it.
No, you're busy writing a book right now.
We need a paper that addresses the organization of the brain by whether longitudinally or laterally, is just it changes the time organization, but time bias of the brain. And the more that is, the more compartmentalized and time oriented you are, because intertemporal isn't comparable versus the temporal, which is the female, which is comparable. Now, are we all in a distribution? Yeah, but when we're talking about mass scales, we observe differences that are exposed at scale. So, I mean, I just find it as that we need that paper so that we can refer it into a Wikipedia page so people can understand that the organization of the brain is pretty simple. Now, coincidentally, paper came out, I think it was Nature, because I got it this morning from one of my, I can't remember who I got it from, but the author's on Twitter, and it's not the first thing he's done, but they've got imaging down to the millisecond, so they can actually trace, and they have relatively well, neural pathways. So, I mean, that's what we need, right? We need millisecond trace of neurotransmission to be able to show these things. Now, of course, what I believe is going to happen, the minute that becomes possible, they're going to suppress the research, right? That's what's going to happen. The second thing is that some of it's very hard. So, you know, you can only detect enough charge. And so I suspect that what you're seeing is you can't see the pictures I've seen so far, you're still talking about areas that work in concert, but you're not seeing the spread, you're not seeing the connection between the areas that are operating in concert. Does that make sense? And so that's still, we're not at the level of resolution we want and need.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a resolution issue, which is.
But we've got increases in resolution. So my belief is that we should be able to get to the next degree of resolution, right? Because where that trace is possible.
Yeah.
So we're getting to where we can prove these things, and once we prove those things, we can draw the correlation between the genetics and the resulting distribution. And I'm suspecting that it's extremely complicated. In other words, there's so many factors involved in producing neural transmissibility. You know,
But it comes down to scanners, and it's like expensive research.
Yeah, I mean, there's expensive research. It's just good, worthwhile, expensive research.
Yeah, but see, the problem is this: it's intolerable research unless we already know the answer.
Yeah, God damn it! That hurt.
Sorry, Kurt. I'm drinking some coffee.
It's like, I did physics last August, right? So it's been 14 months.
Right?
And so I've had enough time to think about it. And it's really obvious now what's wrong with physics.
What's wrong with physics, Kurt?
They're not building there's really two models.
Okay.
All right. And we're not funding attempts to test, to develop those models. We're still funding mathematical models. Or we're funding correlative models, not causal models. And it's heading to magic when it looks like it's very obvious how the subatomic world works.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get a conversation with a guy who's, incrementally doing the math. But I mean, what I want from him is, tell me the equations that have to be funded so we can make because there's a certain number of equations that need to be verified, right? There's a margin for error in each. It's not an infinite number. I think it's in the small double digits, maybe, right? And if that's the case, then the model works better than all other models. And it even explains why strings, you'd get fooled by the string theory thing. It was just an arc it's just an electrical oscillator. So it would explain the dark energy, dark matter thing. I mean, it's just all really obvious. So I'm like, we have to falsify that theory because it's the most obvious one. And I'm like, well, why are we trying all this math when we've got a pretty obvious theory? The problem is nobody wants to risk their career on it. So we have to put enough money behind
Big enough prize.
a big enough prize behind the theory that people will risk their careers on it. You remove their blame. But this whole, string theory ended up going nowhere. I mean, everything ended up going nowhere because it's all math. There's no model. So why was I saying that? I'm saying that for a reason.
What's wrong with physics?
Yeah, I was saying what's wrong with physics for a reason.
Research suppression.
Correct. Thank you. So the problem is that there's not only active suppression in HBD, human differences research. There's suppression in genetic research, and there's suppression by entrenchment in most fields, and there's also we're advocating for stuff that's not scientific, which is basically anything that sounds postmodern isn't scientific. You don't even have to look at
I think it goes back to a larger project that was started many decades ago, which is management of the direction of research by interested parties.
Correct.
And now it's going to suppression of research by similar parties, perhaps the same parties, and then extending to the surface of consciousness with the suppression of speech and the active promotion of speech to control the consciousness of the public. That's the purpose of all this effort.
Loading, framing, and obscuring, right?
Oh, there you go. That was nice. I like that.
Social construction of loading, framing, and obscuring.
That's it.
By the false
it's increasingly obvious is the issue that I would bring to bear.
I mean, it's non-trivial to look at the work we've done here, right?
No.
But I mean, it all becomes very obvious. I'm going to tease somebody. Can I tease somebody?
You can tease anybody you want.
I mean, look, Luke Weinhagen's a Marine. If you can teach a Marine to do philosophy as well as he does philosophy, you can teach anybody. Okay, Luke. Hey, Weinhagen, That's me getting you back for this morning. He owned me this morning in Signal, and I got that's my get back at Luke Weinhagen.
I haven't had a chance to review that work.
He likes to make fun of my vulnerability to women.
I respect that. I respect it. It's what do we say? Sacred cows being what they are, right?
I'm an idiot. Go ahead. I'm well aware. We need to take aware of our birth defects.
There you have it.
My vulnerability to women is I'm casting it as a birth defect over which I have no
I
control.
like that. It's so it's interesting. I was thinking about this. So one of the things that Carol Quigley talked about is like this is the question of theodicy and free will, and in the West, he said that they tend to be governed by rule of law. Everywhere else, they tend to be governed by rule of will. And everybody does what they do because God made them that way. And it's God's responsibility, not the individual's responsibility for the actions they take. But I think that this work has removed that difference, which is there's no free will. The consciousness is an illusion, and God made you like you are, and we're eliminating the defective ones. That's the rule of law. And we have laws by which we remove the defective ones. Does that sound right?
No, I am not going down that channel. You can own that one. That's your turn that's your turn to step over the line.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Because it's like, where's the, because I don't see, I see the premise of consciousness as an illusion.
We don't need to know whether God is external to the universe, that God is the universe, God is within the universe, or God is a construct of man. Doesn't make any difference. We don't have to know that. We just know that the laws are the same. So whether you're basically an atheist,
yes,
or a deist, right, or fundamentalist, whichever fundamentalist you are, it doesn't make any fucking difference because the laws are the same.
The operations are the same,
right? So because you end up with the same law, and then
that's interesting, isn't it?
Right. So I don't, that's why I think universal religion is possible, because then you end up with, well, our gods sent us the messages how to live in our environment.
Right.
And okay. That's all there is, right? There's nothing else to it. And I like to show people that list of dead gods. It's like 500 and something. We go through gods. We go through gods like children go through like fucking jelly beans, right? I mean, it's just, No,
I was looking at this because I was studying Venus yesterday, and it's like this, and it's like they're just variations on the name of the same deity, just rebranded for different civilizations.
Well, that's true if you take a Middle Eastern view of the world, but if you look out there, the gods plural tend to be fall in two categories.
Okay.
Into the natural and the anthropomorphic, right? Their personality traits or whatever.
Right.
So it's physical and psychological.
Sure.
Then when you get to the need for civilization, which is the need for a
cooperation at
scale, people invent a god that would command you to have these certain behaviors and rules, and
integrate.
Right, and the Egyptians' case, which is the most advanced one by far, right? I mean, it gets fucking amazing. It's amazing. It's as complicated as Hindu, but it's actually comprehensible.
Right.
Did you hear how I snuck that in there?
I did. I like that. That's for the non-South Asians.
Yeah, I mean, Indians will tell you that it's fucking complicated.
It's very complicated.
It's very complicated. Well, the institutionalization of the Egyptian and the reduction of it to writing is what, you sort of got this evolution. But so you get that. And then when we get to empires, right, more empires, we had the fundamental problem of the Indo-European expansion created what we think of as paternalism, and it caused probably, it's certainly the cause of the Bronze Age collapse or the Middle Eastern Dark Age, right? That caused that, right? But when they recovered, you had the axial age, where we come up with Buddhism and we come up with Greek philosophy and Chinese philosophy and Middle Eastern religions, and all this axial age comes together because they're trying to figure out how to reconstruct everything, and then you end up with different things given the different powerlessnesses
Right.
of the people. So Confucian is an aristocratic religion, philosophy is an aristocratic religion, Abrahamism is a peasant religion, Hinduism is an aristocratic. It's a class religion, set of religions for classes. So you have, just like we've covered the whole fucking spectrum of possible permutations here, right? Buddhism is like, it's none of my fucking business, right? It's like the inverse of Christianity. I don't know how to describe it, but they're very similar. But it's like Christianity
it's
is
not my problem.
Right. Christianity is, it's my problem, and Buddhism, it's not my problem, right? So
yeah, it is an inversion of it in an interesting way.
And China, we say the same thing for Confucian philosophy. The one I think is miraculous is Hindu philosophy, because it did it, and I can't figure out that's just
so the Buddhism is it's not my problem. Self-development by non-attachment.
Yes. No,
Christianity is development by attachment. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's also, Buddhism is good because it's really compatible with a lot of political structures except ours, right? Because most of the world is you don't have a say, right? It's authoritarian, and ours is, which means you're not responsible, right? And then, I mean, what is Islam? God's responsible for anything. You're not responsible for anything, right? You're a slave, right? Right. Well, so but with European, what's Stoicism? Irresponsible for yourself and anything you control, but not without it. But it depends on your class. So if you're, the upper aristocracy, you're responsible for what's under your dominion. Well, what's noblesse oblige? Well, that's just the Christian application to the Greek method, right? There was European method. So these things it's really fascinating. But anyway, so we had that reaction. So with the Buddhists, so the Middle East was used to being the smart and powerful place, but I mean, by the time Romans come around, it's the poor. I mean, Judea is the Bronx, right? I mean, it's the slum, right? That's not my word. That's other people have said that before me. I don't get the blame for that.
Okay.
So, you got the Romans and the Persians, and you're down there in the Middle East, and like, you think your way is best, but you're being trounced on
everybody's stomping on you.
Everybody's stomping on you because you're backward. And they're leaving you behind. And so they wanted a way to counter it. If Christianity had stuck, and the Nicaeans hadn't hadn't destroyed the original religion by turning it into church dogma, Christianity would have stayed in the Middle East, and it would have helped them. But the minute the Nicaeans do that, they make it impossible for the tribal people who can't have trust like that. They just can't. And so they come up with something more suitable to them. And Islam then goes about and destroys 7 great civilizations of the ancient world and reduces them to ashes. And then Christianity reduces the great civilizations of the Mediterranean to ashes and causes us a 1,000-year dark age. So which we are still, truthfully, we're still trying to get out of. Until, they almost, the Germans almost restored classical civilization in the 1800s, almost. But, the peasants don't want it. It means you're responsible.
Yeah, you're going to be held responsible.
I mean, that's the problem of the next religion is, have we made it possible for the individual to be free of enough dangerous responsibilities that he can now accept responsibility for the commons? Does that make sense? And I think that's possible, because the best religion is really the Greek, which is just, Stoicism is just the Greek way.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Peterson would do it, and so did some others, but he's sort of become a crazy person.
What do you mean by that?
Well, again, I had the same addiction to the same drug, causing the same phenomenon, except I wasn't under as much stress, so I got through it easily. So I understand how horrible that feeling is, right? Seeing colors around bushes, and right, that your whole body feels like it's on fire. It's fucking horrible. And so I just did it cold turkey, which you're not supposed to do, but I didn't want to be on this shit anymore because I realized what I was doing. So I understand that. I also understand what it's like to be near death, because I've been there a couple of times now. And so I understand how that changes you.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm compassionate. And I do understand that he gets value out of the suggestion that's in the Abrahamic religions.
Yes.
Because he's a therapist. But there's a difference between someone who's trying to fix something that's broken, a therapist, and someone who's trying to prevent people from getting broken, an educator or a priest. And so he has failed to make that transition. He's a great therapist, but he's not an educator. And what we need, you need a teacher. We need someone to teach a new religion, or we need people to teach a new religion. And that new religion is going to be something, I think, non-false, because too many people can't believe in anything magic anymore. And by religion, I don't mean people believe in silly stuff. I mean, there has to be this curve, which I described earlier, of secular to fundamental. And that's just a way of you communicate, you representing the universe in emotional or rational terms.
Right.
Which is the adulting cycle, right? Emotional, psychological, rational, empirical. So we need that religion. And I think it's possible. I think it's relatively easy. I think I've touched on enough of it now. The thing is, what are the rituals?
Yes.
What are the rituals? That's the hard part. What rituals? Somebody said they need to be play, which I agree with. What rituals are necessary to produce the sense of equality, which is the pack or feast response, so that the religion does its work of associating the lessons with acceptance, despite our differences. Now, the way you hear it in Islam, you'll hear this. Just listen to a whole bunch of people interviewed while on the Hajj, right? They're marching around the black rock down there, and like, we all equal here, we're,
yes,
right? And so this doesn't matter. We all have sandals and robes. We're all, we're all the same here. Well, that happens in church too, right? It happens at a feast. I mean, you can't. It's very ungracious to be dangerous at a feast, right? I mean, so we need that feeling to be associated with a ritual. Now, the pagans, I think had it down. I mean, it was so good, right? Because it was all joy oriented. And the Christianity is about suffering. And I just think that's done. I don't think you can make suffering heroic anymore. So, and I don't think it's useful to have people view life as suffering. And nor does anybody want it.
Yeah, that sounds like a rough existence right there.
It just seems to me that, you know, the problem with Stoicism is that it was an aristocratic religion that took a lot of investment. Well, I mean, that's the whole trick, is the more investment a religion takes, any kind of cult, the more demonstrated interest you have, the more you stick to it.
That's it.
So that's what we find in cults, is the people who stick to them with the rituals pay the cost as they stay in them. And the people who don't pay the cost don't. That's why cults have costs. So
Right.
it seems to me that this is possible. And given how alienated people feel right now, the collection of voices that's saying we're going to have a religious revival, they're not wrong. I just don't think it's going to be the religion they think that is.
Yes.
Right. And so
everybody recognizes it coming and is trying to front run it a little bit, it seems like.
Well, they want to be right. They don't want to learn and adapt, right? Which the problem is, we've all got to learn and adapt. But I mean, it's just going to work out for Christianity was originally inviting people over for dinner. That was the religion. That's why women ran Christianity. Is you invited people over for dinner. And then you had the Last Supper, right? You repeated this. And of course, this grew.
Mm.
Now, why can you invite people over for dinner? Because the Romans made it wealthy enough for a person to be able to invite people over for dinner, right? And so there were, I'm sure they're imitating the Mithras and whatever. There's all sorts of but I mean, fundamentally, it's a woman's religion. But it was just like feminism is a woman's thing. But as soon as you it's the same fucking thing. So as soon as you can control politics by controlling women, men got involved.
That's right. That's right.
So that's when
this needs to be properly organized under me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can get power by doing this, so why not? Well, what's the academy done? It's sold women feminism to pay and paid the academy to do it, like large amounts of money. So what's
public expense?
It's huge. So it's the same thing. Not criticizing Jesus much here, but Jesus is teaching a wonderful. Churchiness turns out not to be, and using churchiness to tear down aristocracy and meritocracy, and truth for that matter, and stoicism for that matter, and destroying the great arts and letters of the ancient world, creating a dark age. Well, is that what pandering to women does? Because it sure as hell looks like it. Tearing down conservative statues is no different from breaking the nose of Saturn, right? I mean, it's the same thing all over again. That's what they're doing. They just canceling people is the same thing. They had all the philosophers kicked out and the schools closed. This is just a repeat of the Christian destruction of the ancient world, which was a repeat of which was simply followed by the Muslims doing the same thing. Well, I mean, we're just having is another Semitic religious revolt, and for some reason Europeans are vulnerable to it, simply because women are vulnerable to it for no other reason. That's all I can think of, because men we don't put up with the shit.
Well, we actually sort of do.
No, I mean, we put up with the women doing it.
Yes.
Until we can profit from it, and then we put up with profiting from it. And unfortunately, if someone steals your cattle, you go out and do something about it. But if someone steals your norms, traditions, values, institutions, and information system, doesn't seem like people want to get up off their backsides and go do something about it.
Until it degrades the social order sufficiently.
Right. It's getting there.
I think it's getting there. It's pretty much half past there. It's just about timer's going to go off.
Yeah. Everybody knows. Anyway, so what
That's
was
right.
so what was on you? What was that? Did we
So it's like this. It's like we were on about systematization versus empathization.
yes. How hard is that to describe? To women?
Right.
And so is there any disagreement that women are more emotional? This is a debate. It's, are men and women more emotional? Well, more men are less emotional than women are less emotional. More women
Yes.
are more emotional than
And I would say emotional meaning
influence.
motivated by their
Emotion.
feelings,
Yes.
actively not suppressing them or
And so the best studied part of this is how do men and women demonstrate antisocial behavior.
okay.
So we and I have covered this in a piece before, but women internalize and they engage in gossiping, shaming, slutting, troublemaking. You know, they externalize it, their antisocial behavior. They internalize it and then they externalize the behavior as undermining or sedition and acting out, and men do it through violence. So they both do it through drugs, although men will tend to use alcohol and drugs at the rate that women will use sexual promiscuity. So we just get our sedation slightly differently. So this is a big, I mean, I think even Peterson's big on talking about this. There's a huge literature on sex differences and antisocial behavior, and I don't know. I bet I read like 300 papers on it. I mean, it's enormous, right? It just becomes really repetitive because the answer is obvious, right? The problem is, of course, is that this leads to mental illness in women and criminality in men, but it leads to more mental illness in women than it leads to criminality in men. Why? Because women's mental illness isn't externally constrainable like men's criminality is constrainable. So women have a lesser feedback loop and they tend to have an awful lot of mental illness. I mean, what? I mean, a quarter to a third of, depending on which way you look at it, some percentage of women, it's a large percent, are on antidepressants at all times. And it's only 40% of women have to be under them at some point. I mean, it's just very hard for them.
It's anxiety mostly.
Correct. Well,
anxiety and depression is
neuroticism.
Yep.
Sensitivity to anxiety, right? And anxiety is usually about left behind. So what happens in women is they get in a recursive cycle where they try to achieve sedation by externalization. What happens is it causes more rejection, which amplifies the sense of rejection, which is just this vicious cycle you get into. So what you see is women who need an awful lot of women down there in that area of the distribution. They need religion or magical thinking. Yeah. What was I watching the other day? Some guy was doing showing a bunch of videos of crazy girls, right?
Okay.
The crystals and the horoscope and the tarot, whatever. He doesn't want to feel a lot of control of their lives, right? And so they're grasping at something. So, I mean, what they need, of course, is what we call religion. And a religion of membership and something they can have faith in that allows them to believe their emotions are meaningful
Mhm.
because to them they're mysterious. So you hear things like he has energy. No, he just behaves this, and you interpret it like it's energy, right? They blame others. They project. They say the person is doing this. Well, you're interpreting it that way, right? So the women have a lot of projection because they're trying to not be responsible for their emotions being the causality. Well, partly because they can't introspect on those emotions. You following what I'm saying?
I'm trying to say why can't they introspect on their emotions? Because they don't understand why they're getting them.
Yeah, they have no idea. I mean, it's like, who the fuck knows? The problem is they like them. They want those emotions to be true. And once you see that, you're like, they because if they aren't, then they have to regulate them. Then they can't trust them. So they want to trust their emotions. They want to feel. I mean, how we watch women, why do you think they love to watch something that makes them cry?
Hmm.
Because they love the emotion. Why do you think that they start fights with you? Because they love the attention and the emotion. I was like, why do I like to look at, clockworks? Because I love the same fucking thing. I mean, why do you see an engine, right? I mean, it's like, or some big machine or some
Right.
software. It's like, well, I mean, that's a very calm version of what a woman feels when an opportunity for emotional experience arises.
Hmm.
And so, they just get easily overwhelmed and they like it. Emotions are a drug, and they like the drug, and
So they like to indulge it.
they like to indulge those emotions. And what's the opposite? It's like controlling it. For guys, I mean, the only thing that we have trouble controlling is sexual urges, dominance, expression, and sometimes force. All three of which are dangerous to express.
Right.
Right. Otherwise, we express it as I want to go play with my Harley. Right. I mean, just some fucking or guitar or something. It goes somewhere usually constructive. And women, if it goes something constructive, it's like crafts or baking or making myself pretty. I mean, it's always some goddamn thing. And then it goes from there to socializing, and from there to the negatives, which is gossiping and whatever shit is going on. And then it goes to antisocial behavior, and then it's
Right. But right, because it's an interesting function because there's the projection of emotionality on the energy of the other people and then responding to it justifies the response to it.
correct. So all it is evasion of responsibility. That's what I tell you. Everything a woman does, no matter whether it sounds positive or negative, is somehow an attempt to evade responsibility. Now you say, well, why is she caring for her children? Why do you think? She's lightening her burden of caring for children. I mean, it's just all of it. Yeah, there's nothing there. It's like everything's reducible to acquisition. Sure. But I mean, on top of acquisition, the next thing is responsibility. Right. And because that's basically the capital question. So, I mean, the women are just everything they do is avoid responsibility and hyper consume and consume at the maximum with with least responsibility. Now, why do women's your debtor will say, well, women will be more responsible than men to debts. Well, the reason is because women are more responsive to threats of debt, threats than men are. Right? Men are more sensitive to high returns on risk. And women are lower. So that's the same thing for watch women investment groups and male investment groups. So I mean, it's a very sex differences behavior are trivial. I mean, trivial to comprehend because they're all based on a simple set of blocks, which is acquire,
Yeah.
responsibility. Responsibility is based on cost. So gains and losses. I mean, that's all it is. And I don't like knowing this because now whenever women talking, that's all I hear. Right? Just to find it fucking depressing.
Why? Because your brain synthesizes it down to this basic
Yeah,
level.
like, okay, she's just trying to avoid this and that and the other thing. Well, I mean, then you, of course, what you do is you do that long enough, you start saying, okay, well, she's a woman, that would be natural. But that's how you forgive them, right? I mean, you have to, one of the thing I do is like, are you trying to steal from me or not? Right? And if you're not trying to steal from me as a woman, that's fine. You can be a woman.
You're all right.
All right. But if you start trying to steal from me, then you're not. Right. And the problem with the feminists is it's just organized theft. It's just theft. That's all it is.
That's right.
How do I
get
avoid
that.
trade?
What's that?
How do I avoid a trade? In other words, how do I evade responsibility? How to avoid
Right. Right.
Because the trade would force me to pay for my own way.
That's right.
So how do you explain empathizing versus systematizing?
That's it. Good
So
point.
I usually say, well, there's certain things we know about emotionality. Now let's go to the negative. Well, the negative is antisocial behavior best demonstrates sex differences. Now then you go to what the psychologists have done. What's the difference in task performance between men and women? Well, other than women get bored more than men. I mean, men get bored more frequently than women. Women can do a repetitive thing as long as there's girls to gossip around them, right? And men, they don't want to do a repetitive thing too much, not as much, right? Because, and though if you look at old craftsman guilds, it's fine as long as there's guys to shit talk with. So how are we at different tasks? Not much. How do we differ at intellectual tasks? Well, women tend to be more verbal, right? They tend to do better in verbal scores, and men tend to do in spatial temporal scores. Okay, that's something we know. Now the difference so just as the difference is limited in the middle and gets amplified at the end, which is emotion versus systematizing, we see men and women gravitate toward what they prefer, female to social occupations and men to mechanical occupations or procedural or process services. When women motivate to low risk occupations and men gravitate toward higher risk occupations. That's just what we see. The more equal the society, the more they do so, because it's with the freedom to follow your instincts. Humans follow their instincts because it's the least adaptive problem that provides the most joy during the process of continuous reinforcement during learning. Well, if you go to antisocial behavior, right, then you start seeing that explain more. You see the internal empathic antisocial behavior being emotional and social, interpersonal, and you see male antisocial behavior being physical and material and political, right? You see those two things happening. Basically, two types of criminality: social criminality and political or material criminality. And then the same thing happens at the extremes, which you brought up one already, which is there just aren't any women who come up with theories. They're all theoretical advancements tend to be male because the extreme high IQ place and systematizing, which is where all novelty comes from, is so dominant by male. There just aren't any women up there. Even among men, it's a very tiny number of men in any generation that advance theories.
Right.
So, but in between there, you start seeing things that are very interesting. That while I said, just like I said, you can see expressions in verbal versus procedural, and at the extreme, you can see verbal way of doing verbal and you see men doing systematizing. In between those two limits, you see that women do mathematics like language and pictures, and men do math as models. Well, what's more scalable? Models.
So it's analogs in the pictures and words is analogs.
Right. They're experiential. They're reducible to experience. And so the thing is that and this is why I say it's how you know Jewish pseudosciences have been cognitively femininely produced, because across the whole spectrum of pseudosciences, from Freud to Bose to I don't want to go through the whole freaking list, the whole,
Right.
I have this huge list of them, right? To Stephen Jay Gould, to what's his name, Steven Pinker, to, the economists that are out there, is that they think in pictures, and everything they're trying to justify a female bias, except that's all they're doing is justifying a female bias. So why do all the pseudosciences have a female bias? Because the female bias is good versus true. Male bias is true.
Wait. I wanna correct you on this. It's a feminine bias.
Thank you.
Thank you. When you say, and I recognize this, but I want you to elaborate on that justification of a feminine bias. What do you mean by that?
They're justifying how they feel, not explaining what they see. It's because they're projecting.
Oh, so it involves projection of motives on others.
Right, because of what we talked about yesterday, is that they are just like they're unaware to be unable to introspect. They're unaware to the degree to which emotions are affecting their choices. So since all choices, all decisions are intuitionistic, or it's fundamentally logic is an intuition. The order of biases in your intuition affect subtleties in your predictions. So
Subtleties of prediction.
So this is why we see this huge difference in thought. And I tried to explain this to you, and I did a poor job. But it's like you can't take an average of averages.
Right.
And so women see a bunch of individual cases of averages. They don't see the average of the averages, so to speak. In other words, they don't see the system. They can't run a model. And I don't know how to it's very hard to say that, can you rotate an object in space? Well, I can do that all fucking day long, right? But can you rotate a concept in time? Like for me, when I say I sense something in the force, and I'm just joking, but I have a model of the world,
right?
A model of the economy, and I feel it the way you can imagine a globe spinning,
right?
Spinning a globe and seeing the
right
go around. Now you see that now, but if you imagine yourself pirouetting or diving,
right?
You feel yourself pirouetting or diving. Well, I can feel time the way most people would say, I'm anticipating my golf swing, or I'm anticipating my dive, right? That's modeling. And why does that work? Because all cognition is an evolution of bodily movement.
Right.
For some reason, females attribute higher salience to good than to true. And so when they predict, their prediction is biased to good rather than to true. And because they can't systematize, they have no way of looking at this and modeling it. They just see it through a sequence of associations, not through models. I have tried to do a better job of explaining how, if you close your eyes and you move your body around, or I used to think about it as a golf swing, because you're built for a golf swing and I'm built for lifting heavy things.
Right.
Okay, right. I don't have a very good golf swing. It's a miracle that I can make my body do that, given I'm basically a brick. Right? My cousin Jay, tall, broad shoulder, he's over 6 feet, right? Thin, broad shoulders, long arms and legs. When that guy hits a ball, like while he's yawning, it goes a straight country mile, right? Me, I'm like, I got to do everything right, in order to make sure I just get it straight and a half mile, right, so to speak. It's but when you do that, you visualize, right? You repeat. Now it turns out that visualizing is doing, because why?
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because you're calculating your bodily motion at the same time you calculate any vision, right? We used to not understand. We used to think you thought of something and then your body figured it out. It doesn't work that way. Figuring
the
out
same thing.
is how it's done, right? So you can't envision, you don't realize because you can't introspect on that. But for me, when I look at time, and I can pretty much model all of 65,000 years, right? I can run a model in my head, right? And so, and if I want to think about the economy, I sort
Maybe
of
we call it a simulation or something.
simulation, right? I can simulate the economy in my head, right? And if you stay in touch with the data, you can do that.
Right.
After a while, you do it enough, you think about it enough, you can run a simulation. And so you get people who run different simulations, like with different criteria by different means. And so, but it turns out that the difference between, let's say, a George Friedman, Peter Zeihan, and a Kurt Doolittle is due to what we're interested in.
Right.
It's important because whatever is the most interested thing is what keeps informing you. Well, why wouldn't a person who had an emotional bias perform a whole lot of calculations weighted toward the good rather than the true? In other words,
because it's a preference issue there,
well,
right?
you can't control it, right? That's the thing, right? It's like being left-handed or right-handed, right? I mean, you can't control it. So that person is, because your body's it's just doing a vast number of sums to get your attention.
Right.
But if you're biased to George Friedman as the political, and to Peter Zeihan as demographic and economic, and to Doolittle as the evolutionary, well, you're gonna see different weights of trivia. Now, what's surprising is how close the spectrum is, the political to the demographic to the evolutionary, which is just, and on the other side of George Friedman's the economic, right?
Right.
Economic to political to demographic to evolutionary. So you're going to get, when those four things intersect, something's probably right.
Mm-hmm.
And so the problem is we're not saying that there's we're not looking all the way down to what we call the feminine cognition of the spectrum, which they're not projecting the political bias, the demographic bias, or the evolutionary bias. They're projecting the experiential bias. What's good.
It just goes sub-economic even.
Right. It's right down to the interpersonal, the social, interpersonal. So it's really basically subjective. So, I mean, I'm trying to,
so this is interesting because I'm looking at this scale. It's like there's an intrinsic time preference in that scale of that series you just wrote.
Absolutely. Well, that's why I organized it that way, so I could add women.
I figured.
Yeah. Okay. So, sorry.
It's for the audience.
Huh?
I'm here to serve the audience. Sir.
I know. Sorry, I said something stupid, novice. No, so we forget that. So, I mean, you think of it this way. Your head has, just imagine, right, 100 million computers in it, right? And they're all little, and they're all doing the same thing. But they all have, which is how they're calculating something, or whatever you want it to be. And they're calculating that thing by the use of what we call episodes.
Okay.
So an episode can be one of the time I pulled this coffee cup off the shelf for the first time, right? That's an episode. There's a whole bunch of stuff associated with that episode.
Right.
But what's really stored in our mind is a million little fragments.
Right.
That add up, that assemble that episode, which is why the fucking thing changes every time we think about it. We just get a little bit twisted that way, whatever.
Right.
Till your mother remembers the inverse of what actually happened during some birthday party when you were 5, right? I mean, it's just like, anyway, which discussions I've had with my mother a number of times. Ma, that is, my sisters and I, Ma, that is not what happened. That's what you wish happened, right? I mean, because she's played the story over her head so many times. I'm going to lose my train of thought.
No, you're not. Episodic modeling.
episodic modeling. So you have all these episodes stored as fragments. Well, every episode has evaluations, emotional responses attached to it, based on valences, which is what you felt about it at the time, and what you felt about it at the time is what you acquired or lost at the time. And that's simple. That's why novelties that acquired something or stick in your head, and novelties that lost something stick in your head.
Even better.
Even better, right? Just because you don't want to do that. Gaining is good, but you absolutely don't want to lose.
It hurts.
It hurts. So you got to think of the brain. All those things are adding this stuff up, like a big Excel spreadsheet, really.
It's calculation, right?
And it's like
computation.
Okay, it's computation.
Okay.
And the sum of those fragments of episodes, right? And the sum of the variance of them forms some kind of index to everything else that it's supported. But I mean, great, but everywhere along the way, there's some valence associated with every fragment. Because that's
right.
That's the way your brain indexes memories, is by episodes. And that's one of my favorite pieces. I won't go down it right now, but how your brain creates an index to an episode is really fantastic.
Yes. And then it relates it to the current action, right? Your current situation.
Right. But it's also calculating your motion, what you have. That's the interesting part. It's like, here's what it is. Here's the actions that would let me get there. That's right. That's the amazing shit. Think of what's going on there. Your body is calculating the motion, the actions necessary to bring the thing about before you're aware of it.
Right, and then it generates the will to do so by emotionality associated with the valences is attached.
Right, and what's agency? What's agency? The ability to hold that thing in place while you think about it. Right, that's all it is, right? Because otherwise, when you get stung, you could do this, right? I mean, there's because that's just like okay, interrupt, bypass, right? But if thing comes up there and it's like got some fuzzy weights to it, you're like, let's think about this for a minute. Right, you can resist it. So the problem with emotional people or impulsive people is that impulse overcomes it.
Yep.
So it's just, like I said, the brain is really fucked. At least to me. My partner Jim said, "You think everything is simple once you understand it, but there's a lot of work to get there. There's a lot of work to do."
That's fair. That's fair.
That's my job, though. Your job is getting stuff done. I just have to figure it out.
Figure it out and simplify it so that it's understandable, right?
So, so how do you explain this? Well, I just tried explain the difference, but you can't. It's like a conservative or a capitalizer can understand the mind of a progressive, meaning a consumer. But the consumer can't understand the mind of a capitalizer.
No, they just call them greedy.
Right.
Because that's not good.
Right. Because they see emotions generated by intuitions as the cause of behavior. We see the cause of behavior and then attribute emotions to whether it's desirable or not. So they can't imagine that we're not driven by emotions, that we're driven by reason. And when they try to say they're driven by reason, they're actually not. I love an honest woman, I can't remember her name right now, very beautiful woman, says to me, well, the truth is that I'm a woman. And so I feel something and I say something, but then I have to go figure out why. That's an honest woman. It's hard to get them though. So if the problem I have is you have to give enough of these experiments, this talk long enough, so the woman can begin to understand, or a person, whether a woman, but a person who's on the other side of it, a feminine mind can understand Because what they're really trying to do is seek to disagree with you. They're not trying to seek to understand. They're seeking to disagree. Why?
Trying
Because they're
to, it's critical function, yeah.
right. They're trying to disagree because they're trying to undermine it because they don't want to adapt and they don't want to learn because they don't want to self-regulate their emotions. They want to believe those emotions are true. And if they want to believe those emotions are true, they certainly don't want to believe emotions that are going to cause them to differ from the people that surround them. They get sustenance and care and support and attention from. So what you're telling a woman who or feminine mind is that you have to go encounter risk if you embrace the truth.
Yes, and that's disagreeable.
That's just they can't do it. Can't stand it. And so what you'll generally find is an honest woman, which there are a few of, will say, that's true, but I can't do that because people would hate me. That's
People
okay.
would hate me.
Well,
People would hate me. I don't understand.
My friends would hate me. So I can't do that. I said, you don't have to. You just have to not argue with me.
That would be sufficient.
That's right. I don't.
We don't need to do that, right?
I'm not going to argue with you about the color of the fucking drapes. Okay. I mean,
I don't care.
not only don't I care, I don't consider myself qualified.
That's right.
My case, I probably am, but in most cases, it's
That's right.
It doesn't. I'm qualified, but even if I am, it doesn't matter enough. You have to say the same thing to me when it's about politics, right? Or it's about populations. Then you probably are qualified to have an opinion, but you need to not care so much because honestly, you're not capable any more capable than I am about figuring. My wife used to give me shit. How can you have studied art and be so good at all this stuff? When I put a bunch of stuff and ask you to imagine how this room is going to look, you can't do it. I say, cause.
Yep, I get it.
It was a big difference for me sitting down and creating a drawing.
Right.
Right. And visualize that way from you just showing me these pictures. I can't make it work. And she'd always think that was ridiculous. I'm like, yeah, but let's talk about what I can envision. The difference is I can envision drapes and chairs and pictures and styles and colors. I just may not be able to pull them together, but you can't even envision what I think about. Not possible. So, so this is what we have. Same thing we have in Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations. Is that conservative or capitalizers experience all emotions, all the foundation emotions about the same. And the feminine left, they basically specialize. They only have a couple of foundational emotions that override all the rest. Harm, care, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so proportionality, equality, right? Those two are really good. But we do all these other things. So we weigh everything like this. They don't. They weigh anything like this, which is all emotion. And so they can't understand us. And we can't understand them. But we can understand them. We just can't understand why they only weigh this when they ignore loyalty.
Right. But see, the issue is interesting because it's like there's a function there that is this conversational function in which the rational people think they're being irrational, and they are, because they aren't paying attention to they're attributing to everything to emotionality where it's not,
right?
Because they're projecting emotionality onto the opposition,
right,
at the expense of rationality. So they don't have to be internally consistent or logical in their presentation.
They have to be emotionally consistent, not logically consistent.
So they're looking for virtue signals, not logical consistency and good argumentation. So you're not speaking the same languages.
What's the purpose of logic or responsibility? Think of it that way. That's fucking terrifying.
That was rude.
Right. And so now you think about it this way, is say, we talked about this before and you just covered it, but I want to say it, figure out how to say this clearly. As I said, the purpose of a woman is to avoid female cognition, feminine cognition.
Thank you.
Is to avoid responsibility. The reality is to limit responsibility to her offspring. That's really the answer.
To shield them from responsibility.
Well, she has to. They can't be responsible because they're children, so she has to be responsible for them. And so she's trying to shield herself and them from.
She has too much responsibility already.
Right, and this is why empathy is valuable to them, is because it's not rational. They just got to keep track of a bunch of rugrats' feelings and how they react to the world, because that's all they are until they're adults and they can become somewhat rational, at least if they're male. So what do? Is that since emotion is their system of measurement, they project. And so what you hear all the time is they project an emotional intuition on you that you don't have. I can't.
Regardless of the fact that you may have it. It's just not right. It's not salient.
Yeah, but you're one of your favorite things to say is 3 words. I don't care. You say that all the time, right?
It's like this. I do care, but it's like it's not salient. Is what that means.
Yes, it's right. So, what I mean by that, what I would say is, yes, I understand, but it's not meaningful, right?
Right. It has no value in my decision-making process.
But what I encounter most is, I would never even think of that. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've said that in my life. I'd never even think of that. It never occurred to me.
Yes.
Right. And what a woman is attributing the motion. What I want to say is, I can't even imagine thinking that immature and trivially. Or that's what I want to say. I can't even imagine it because my life is full of heavy things.
Right. It's just, it doesn't rise to the level.
It doesn't even,
significance.
I can't, the fact that you could think about that is amazing to me. I mean, don't you have anything important in your life?
What's going on in your head?
I mean, why would you think that so-and-so's opinion means the fucking thing? Right? I mean, who gives a shit? Or my favorite thing women bring up in a meeting. Well, these people are going to think, like, well, that means you failed to inform them, doesn't it?
That's right.
But then that's responsibility. That means you've got to inform them about something they don't want to be informed about, and the women don't want to do that. That's why they get men. That's why we have to deliver all the hard.
They send us in.
They send us in because, frankly, we don't give a shit, right? I mean, it's not that we don't give a shit. It's like we don't give enough of a shit to matter.
It's like about like a bowling ball.
Yeah. And so you have this thing of how do you explain it? It is like the question is, are you able? So I can explain it, but are you able to understand it? Right. And so you're going to say that. And the problem is that's the challenge. That's how you start.
Now you threw the glove down.
So I can explain it, but can you understand it? Because if you can, that would be useful. Even if you can, I doubt you'll like it, but at least you can understand it.
I like it. That's an interesting parameter.
Appreciate it. I mean, it's going to be
right.
True. We say this, but I mean, there are plenty of there's a whole women's group in our movement, right? They just stay off to the side so they don't have to deal with the rude boys. Right. But there's a whole women's group out there, and it's all, I don't know what they call themselves, as traditional something or other. But they're all in, they do the whole.
Hey, someone put that in the signal.
No, I don't.
Oh, just the name of it.
They recruit people.
Oh, okay.
They recruit people. I don't.
Okay.
I don't want the mean boys to have anything.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, keep the mean boys out. That's right.
Poison the goddamn well in 5 minutes. How we lose our women is because the guys are such assholes.
The rude boys.
They're not. They don't. I mean, they're still women, right? They
nice, boys.
Well, they're still women. There's no, and they're going to take it. It's like my favorite thing is, okay, so we have women that agree with us on traditional roles, but because you're angry, you want them to not be women. I'm like, the whole point is they want to be women, right? They want us to be men.
Oh, you just made me sad that there's some guys that are that thick.
There's a lot of them.
Really?
It's why I don't want to deal with them.
Oh no,
I get very tired of these guys.
They're tiresome.
I mean, it's like, I want to help you, but I can't help you because you're too angry. It's what same thing is what John said. They're just angry. They want blood, and there's nothing we can't do anything with them because they're that far gone. It's not about and we had what 2 million subs pretty quickly within not very long. So, but you can't you have to keep telling them what they want to hear, because the minute you tell them they got to do something, take responsibility, make a pragmatic political decision, given the diversity of people out there. In other words, you don't get to do what you want. You have to find a solution that satisfies at least the middle. Right. And they're so fucking childish that it's impossible. So I just don't want to deal with them. I want to leave the ladies alone because they're fucking, I mean,
That's right.
especially the two I know that run it are people personally important to me. I love both.
Very good.
Anyway, so the point is, you start out with, I can explain it to you, but with these examples, right? But the best thing is, it's like that spectrum I said. You start out in the middle where we're not very different, which is task-based, because that's what they're showing. And you say, well, how do our personalities different? Well, it's not that big a difference, right? But it shows up as empathizing versus systematizing in the big five. And then when you get down to the facets, every one of the facets is differentiated by empathizing, by systematizing. If you look at the Myers-Briggs, the difference between Myers-Briggs and it and the other personality tests, it turns out that the difference between the reason Myers-Briggs includes empathizing versus systematizing, and the big five doesn't. The big fives can only manifest it down in the facets. If you go to IQ, we know what the difference in IQ. Men have a little bit bigger brains, so 10% bigger brains. So roughly we're a little more, the average man, the body of men is about a little bit smarter than the body of women, but because men are distributed more widely, it neutralizes some of that advantage in the aggregate. But by basically a bigger brain means you're going to be a little bit smarter. That said, that's not the value. The difference is that women are better at verbal and many things, and men are better at spatial and fewer things. Right? We think in compartments in time, and they think about many things in the moment, which is they manage resources with kids, and we manage territory with they manage goods with children, right? And we manage territory and its assets and time against enemies. So then you get down to antisocial behavior. How do both sexes demonstrate antisocial behavior? And then you go the other way on the other side of it and say, okay, here's how the predictive end varies in males and females. In other words, you see males and females selecting for different occupations because they prefer them. Mm-hmm. And you see the very hard occupations exclusively male, right? And you see the theoretical places exclusively male. But likewise, you see the criminality heavily male, right? I mean, so we have a wider dispersal just because the Y chromosome has less repair. In other words, you get more variation just by less repair. So this is, and as you say, well, why is this distribution again? Well, because neurons there's no program for neurons, right? They're baited into conforming to the body, right? So how are they baited? Well, they're baited by a bias toward the empathy, right? Emotions or testosterone. Well, you could argue the other way is that they're baited toward empathy, but the testosterone inhibits. So you get overgrowth of testosterone, which is distances, instead of localities, which is, I mean, it's fucking obvious. And so what's the difference is you have lateral integrated female in-time experience and longitudinal overtime compartmentalized male experience. And it's way easier to talk about the world experientially than it is about the world intertemporally. I mean, we talk about everything as an analogy to experience, but what analogy to experience is time? Well, I mean, it's pretty hard. The only thing you can do is tell a story. I'll give an example. So men don't tell stories, we tell facts. From the facts, we derive the story, because it's the only way to talk about a thing. Whereas women can talk about emotions and experiences all day long, makes most men want to hang themselves. Where's the fucking point? Well, the point is the experience, right? I mean, of course, you want to kill yourself, right?
You feel better. That was good, man.
Well, I mean, every guy does this, right? It's part of being married. How do you half listen? Really, it's like, how do you how do you how do you 4% listen to your wife? Well, think about,
enough that she doesn't get onto the
well,
fact.
it's enough so that if you so that you can say, yep, I understand. And if something reaches up to maybe 8%,
Rises above that
you
4%.
can say, okay, well, wait a minute. Yeah,
Wait, slow down. Tell me that again.
yeah, exactly. That's all you do. And every guy does that. And you have to, because you can't survive. You just can't tolerate it. And then they get pissed at us for mansplaining, which is the same thing. So women's splaining is all this talking you through people's emotions. Mansplaining is telling you the systemic effect of something they don't give a shit about or can't even visualize.
That's right. They don't want to know.
They don't want to know. So I just think it's funny is that, you mansplain something because you can't believe that woman would be that dumb. And they can't imagine you'd be so dumb as to explain it to them because that's explanation.
Like I care.
Right? We don't care about your explanation. You're talking us through how Mary Jane's emotions were during her fucking fight with her husband over some fucking baby diaper. I mean, we can't even imagine that occupies a thought in your head. I mean, why would you even think about that?
Wait. Much less explain to me at length.
Right. Why would you woman-splain?
Wait, and be insulted when I don't want to hear it.
Yes. Why would you woman-splain that to me? If I don't. No, it's actually really important as a man not to mansplain to your wife.
No, I know.
Right. But it's really easy to suppress mansplaining. It's really easy not to, because when you hear this most commonly said is, don't solve the problem for me.
Right.
Listen. Well, that's because when you try to solve the problem, now you're mansplaining. That's not the point.
I know.
It's not the point of a woman's, right? Can you imagine how fucking confused a woman's brain must be at any given time with all the random shit popping in? And they want to talk to you to organize it and evaluate it and think it through. The same way you want to sketch something out on a piece of paper, figure out you could
They want to sketch it in your ear.
They want to sketch it in your ear. It's the same fucking thing. Well, if you love your wife, you're going to let her do that. And you have a daughter and she wants to talk about the incredibly stupid thing 15-year-old girls talk about. You just let it go in and one ear and out the other. And you realize that's what she needs from you, is to be able to think it through. Because I don't know if you've ever been to therapy, but I have. And when you talk something through, you go, wow, and the minute you say it out loud, it's like, wow, that was fucking stupid. But you've had it in your head for like 12 years. But the minute you said it out of your mouth to another person, you're like, well, that was stupid. Well, what do you think women are doing? They're doing the exact same thing. It's basically therapy for having the burden of a female mind that has to keep track of 15 rugrats and all the goddamn shit they're eating and what they might put in their mouth, what cliff they might fall off, and who might bite each other. I mean, Jesus, being a woman is fucking hard.
So it's just comb it out, tease it out, little wrinkles in consciousness. That's all that is.
I guess it just fucking be patient with one another. It takes work to be patient. Now, when you live in a village, you're putting up this shit all day long, right?
Right.
You don't live in a village anymore. We're looking for quick. And it doesn't work that way. You've got to be willing to listen to somebody for a fucking hour about nonsense. And it's just a pain in the ass.
I run into that on the telemedicine business.
Of course you do. I was waiting.
It's like this one. It's like you kind of study the people that just need to keep on talking about stuff, and it's like they know what they're doing. I'm like, okay, like just wait for the point at which you're like, okay, it's going to be necessary for me to interrupt this in order to truncate it to some degree.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
So the problem, I want to close up with an important insight. We're not ordinary people. And so if you're just an ordinary guy, right? I'm thinking of an individual I know that lives in my little town. He's a working class guy, got a bunch of daughters. He treats them like princesses, right?
Nice.
Right. He works like a dog. You know what? He's happy. You know why? His daughters love him.
That's beautiful.
right? Well, if you're a man and your
That's
daughter's,
nothing better.
it doesn't get better. So I guess it's just fucking awesome. I don't know, because no matter what everybody rejects you out in the world, your other women or other things, you just have women that love you.
That's nice.
It's wonderful. Not that mine do, by the way. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, I understand there's
So-
certain caveats associated with this story.
But so the problem is that we tend to associate with fairly intelligent women. I've tried to associate with the pretty and emotional, whatever, and it's really quite nice actually if you both have enough friends that fill that other part of your world. If you have an extended family and you have an extended friend circle, it works out great. But if you're really dependent on each other for your social, that difference gets to be very difficult. But even if you are dependent on each other and whatever, and you're both really well educated, it is difficult for an educated woman to grasp that if you're a man with certain abilities, she will never catch up. For some reason, it's okay for a man to say, my wife is smarter than me. I don't know why. As long as he still feels like he's manly, doesn't bother him so much, because you do hear that. Because that happens, because it has to happen at the bottom half, right?
That's right.
It has to, because there's just not enough men down there. And I always say, well, my wife is smarter than me in this. She was, right? Perfect handler, standing behind me saying, this person is married to so-and-so. Remember so-and-so? They were at the party here and she was wearing the whatever. And I'm like, and then I walk up to the person.
She's connecting your episodic memory.
Right. And I'm like, and I walk up to the person. I say something intelligent. It sounds like I remember them, care about them. I had no idea it was Laura that did that, right? She's
Of
just,
course.
and that's a perfect marriage, really. I mean, it's just like, meanwhile, she can send you and me in to fight a war on something, which is, and I'm like, I'm having a problem with this. Can you take care of it? Sure. Go in.
Right.
Fine. Right. It's the same. So you have this reciprocal thing. So the problem is that the more educated the woman, the more she's bought into the more nonsense, the harder it is for accept that. The reality is that the upper end of the spectrum is dominated by men, because the upper end of the spectrum is dominated by men. And it's not just, and whilst a lot of it is interest, right? At the extremes, it's not interest, it's ability. And the difference in ability is because of the limits of the verbal cognition versus spatial cognition. That's just the way it is.
Right. Cognitive style.
Cognitive style is just different. I mean, you can't do it. Can't do it. Can't be done. And I suspect that this is pretty well known now, but we'll see it more. We'll see it come out over the next 20 years with even more clarity. So in that sense, I just go back to, it's a division of labor. Women do
That's how I
this,
view it.
this. And the problem you've got to get across is, why do you need to be men? Because the truth is, no matter what you do, there's always above the upper third, there's always a man who can do it better than you. So redistributing to make you women feel good is only okay as long as it doesn't cause problems. But it turns out it's already causing catastrophic problems in our competitiveness across the spectrum, strategic military, political, and intellectual and economic spectrum. So we can't afford to distribute. We can't afford to redistribute the high end to women, even no matter how much they want to, because it eventually shows up.
Right. It impairs the computational efficiency
of the group. Yep. On the other hand, I don't want to. I think I've said this before. Is that Eleanor Ostrom does a better job of talking about commons. I can't remember the woman who does a better job of talking about logic, and I can't remember whenever the woman off the top of my head does a job about talking about math. So there's a difference between via positiva discovery and via positiva education.
All right.
In other words, it's
Define that.
it's not clear that women aren't better teachers.
Okay, I see.
At least for everything but the outliers. And I can say that because, I mean, I have at least those 3 women. I can think of some more, Barbara. 2 more. I can think of only 2 more women. They're way better at the social and empirical. All right. They're not good at theoretical, but they're at the it's like Babbage's wife, you know, she ends up writing the program. Right. I mean, you know, he invents the machine, but she
Right.
being the clerk, right? And she really does understand it. And so you just like, well, of course he'd invent it, but she'd make it understandable. Right. I mean, how to use it. I mean, I just think that's fucking brilliant. It's such an obvious thing. You know, it would make sense that Maxwell and those guys would do their math and engineering, but it would also make sense what Curie did. Right. I mean, you still see this in a women's contribution to science. Now, if you look at who's doing all the work that really matters, it's all males. It's all discovery, in the sense that it's discovery of those things that can't be perceived by sense perception. But if you look at who does a lot of the work, it's women. You know, because a lot of the work's empirical.
That's right. It's like it's many of it repetitive function.
Well, and also you have to observe details.
Right.
Most of research is engineering in every field. You don't think of chemistry as engineering, but I mean, you have trying to put together something that produces an output that you can measure something, right? And so you have experimentalists. It's like the same thing in every field. So at the extremes, this is still true. So why are we talking about this? Talking about how difficult it is to explain to women the difference between systematizing and empathizing, and that these are 2 different sets of skills that cover the spectrum, and it's the difference between them, continually expanding excellences in these directions, that we discover more surface area under the triangle of possible knowledge, where there's some good to be obtained by reciprocal exchange. You know,
Through complementary action.
right. And so it's not that we're equal. If we're equal, it would be bad. That's the hard part to get across. It's our inequality, and the greater inequality, the more useful it is.
Yeah.
And so does that mean, what does that really mean? It only means anything in the context you and I are talking about, as it explains why women have not been able to, we have not maintained the law and the sciences to account for women's biases. And it's harder to account for women to account for their biases. And so we haven't, in the law, we haven't accounted for women's antisocial behavior. And economics and politics, we haven't accounted for women's cognitive behavior and our cognitive emotional behavior. And it just turns out that the women that said women should vote they were right. I don't want to be the one to say that, but I mean, turns out it's true. Now, my attitude is I want to find a way for women to vote.
So you give them their own house.
You give them their own house, and then it's not a problem, because now you can go back to trading. And then, you know, and so there are people who don't like that I suggest that solution, but it's pretty easy to, it's pretty hard to say to women, you don't have a say.
Right.
Right. So the question would only be a say over what and how. And of course, people, when we talk about democracy, they're thinking about majority democracy,
Yep.
but not multi-house concurrent democracy. But also they're not talking about that in theory, the Senate and House can only originate certain bills. This turned out to not work, right? But in our world, you could only veto the world I'm proposing in the House. You could only veto something over which you had say. And there are things that men shouldn't have say over and regarding women, and there's things that women shouldn't have say over regarding men. Can those two things be handled? I suspect it's possible to manage them with two houses. And that's an experiment that is worth running rather than cutting women out of the process altogether.
That's right.
That's my, so the real problem is not women's choices. It's that women heart all organizations. The competitiveness of all organizations, including the organization we call government, by working in it. And women hurt all businesses by working in it. And women really hurt intellectual progress by working in it. And the academy in it. And women's criminality, which we haven't suppressed, really hurts society. So why am I picking on women? Well, because we just let you folks in to economy, polity, and law, intellect, and everything, and you didn't have any experience with it. So our law didn't accommodate for it. Whereas we've spent 600 years integrating men into a gradually moving classes of men upward, and developing our law to suppress every possible invention of criminality men come up with. And believe it or not, we're really good at inventing new means of criminality about every opportunity we have. Well, so are women. We just do different kinds of criminality. The difference is male criminality is more visible and less tolerated. Women's criminality is less visible and more tolerated. So we have to merely account for, if we want to keep women in the process, which is what I'm advocating, despite what a lot of conservatives would like. I'm saying you need multi-house government, you need to prohibit female antisocial behavior in the commons. Are women going to like that? No, of course not, because what do you think feminism is? It's the institutionalization of female antisocial behavior in the commons in order to achieve by destruction what women are incapable to do by innovation and construction, which is the other side of the argument. Women don't invent anything at all. And men lead the charge, create new things, women benefit from it, and then they treat it like they deserve it. You deserve it if you're a mother, but if you're not a mother, you don't. It's not an opinion. It's simply a fact of measurement, right? If you're not a mother, you're not doing what men are doing by opposite means. So that's this is the big hard story.
Yeah.
That you've got what's gone wrong is mostly female, but it's gone wrong because we didn't constrain it, because we scaled up our law, but we didn't scale up the common law. And I started this thread yesterday, is that I understated the damage of the failure to include the common law in the Constitution, because all of this stuff is prohibited by the common law. But what's happened is they've tried to get away with everything by saying it's not in the Constitution. Well, I mean, if it's the Constitution, and the Constitution is a constitution of the common law, we operate in the common law system. Yeah, so that's what the court is doing right now. The Supreme Court is saying, but the common law doesn't let that. Right, so the court's reimposing common law. I'm just saying it needs to be explicit, because the common law prohibits female antisocial behavior. If we, what the interesting test would be, could we get any of this stuff before the Supreme Court so that we can get it without having a revolution?
Right.
I'd like to hang a lot of people, but we could. It's possible to do without. We might be able to do it just by bringing a few issues to the court and codifying those 6 or 8 fucking problems that are in there. I need to have figured this out when I was 40. I needed to finish when I was 40, not 60.
Oh, well, I'll work on that later. After you finish it when you're 60.
All right. Do you have more stuff?
Well, I do, but I don't know if we should go into it at this point. I'm interested in discussing, we could do it tomorrow. Is the discussion related to the time preferences with regard to evaluation of this conflict in the Russian Ukraine?
Why not? I'd like to change the subject.
Okay, that will be
It's up to you.
that'll be fine.
I got
You mentioned that there's a time preference function in evaluating how to properly resolve this conflict.
okay. Can I get a coffee?
Oh,
I can pause and get a coffee, and we'll come
that would
back.
be super.
I'm gonna hit pause.
Okay.
Where are you? Where you are?